Well, welcome everyone. We'll get started. I'm Jill Dawsey, curator at the Museum of Contemporary Art San Diego. Welcome to Art Auction session number 3. Thank you so much for joining today. Before we get started, I'll just go over a few business points about the auction. I want to remind everyone that you can visit mcasd.org for all of the art auction resources you might need. There's a virtual tour of the works that we've installed. We have about a third of the works installed downtown. There's a catalog flip book and all of the important dates. I'll remind you right now that Catherine Canjo is giving a talk like this one on Thursday, this Thursday at 11 a.m., October 8th. The silent auction is now live, hosted on our official Artsy page. And that will run through October 14th. The live event will be Thursday, October 15th at 6 p.m. We also have tour slots available for those who'd like to come in and see the works we have installed. A couple of notes about the auction itself. This year you're able to bid on your phone, your tablet, or your PC. You can either install an app or bid directly on the MCASD Artsy page in your browser window. One more important thing, for the first time ever, you can place max bids. So this is kind of like familiar sites like eBay, where you can set it and forget it, and then you're notified if you're outbid. So we encourage you to do this for both silent and live items. If you have questions or need help, please feel free to reach out to April at mcasd.org, and she can help with artsy navigation, registering, bidding, and so on. And also, please feel free to reach out to the curatorial team with any questions you have about the works in the auction. So I'm going to get started and share my screen. Okay, great. And so I'm going to cover 24 of the artists in the auction today, and I'm going to start with one of our hometown favorites. This is Kim Mcconnell, the influential San Diego-based artist who many of you know and love. MCASD organized his retrospective about 10 years ago. He's one of the founding artists of the pattern and decoration movement of the 1970s, and back then his work departed from the minimalist tendencies of the day. He embraced vivid patterning in his work, often on canvases that were left unstretched and on painted furniture. And his work was prominently featured in the LA MoCA retrospective of pattern and decoration, which was called With Pleasure, Pattern and Decoration in American Art from 1972 to 1985. And we lent our early important painted sofa that's in the museum's collection. For the auction, Mcconnell has created a brand new furniture piece, a brand new painted furniture piece that we're presenting in the live auction. And I want to note that the works that you're seeing here come together as a set. It's a painting and a painted chair. Mcconnell chose to present them as a tableau. The chair is titled How Not to Paint a Chair. It's an homage to John Baldessari, who was one of Mcconnell's professors back in the day in 1968. And Baldessari's work has lots of knots in it. I will not make any more boring art, he wrote over and over again. And in another piece, this is not to be looked at. Baldessari is referenced not only in the title, but in the colored dots that are painted on the 12 fabric, which remind us of the dots that Baldessari placed over faces in his work of the 1980s forward. And I want to also tell you that Kim confirmed that you can sit in the chair. The accompanying painting is one of Mcconnell's signature enamel Abracadabra series, a nicely sized compact painting at about 16 by 16 inches. Over the years, Mcconnell's patterns have become more geometric and hard-edged, but they continue to reflect his interest in ornamentation from cultures around the world. I'm going to jump to another vivid piece in our live auction by Fred Tomaselli, a major internationally renowned artist who also has a local presence in the last several years with his mural project for the Murals of La Jolla, as well as an exhibition, a solo show at the Oceanside Museum in 2018. The work you're seeing here is part of a series that the artist started in 2005, and it's ongoing. It's one of his most recognizable bodies of work, and for each piece in the series, he transforms the front page of the New York Times with his mesmerizing patterning, and he titles the work with the newspaper date. So this is December 22nd, 2015, and Catherine spoke a bit about this work on Sunday in her her panel and mentioned, you know, it feels like it could be this year because Trump is in the headlines, China. Feels like a very timely piece. Tomaselli first drew attention in the 1990s with his detailed, meticulously crafted collage paintings that incorporated psychedelic imagery and also psychedelic drugs. That's what he's kind of famous for, in the form of pills and hallucinogenic plants that he would embed in the resin surface of his works. We have one like this in MCASD's collection. Here, Tomaselli highlights the daily news cycle as a surreal and psychedelic experience in and of itself, which it certainly has been of late. I think acquiring this work would kind of be an interesting moment, or interesting way to commemorate this moment in our lives and in history. But I'll just add that ultimately what Tomaselli is interested in is kind of expanded forms of consciousness, human consciousness. And he creates these paintings that are both, you know, gorgeous and very cerebral. Next, we'll go to the work of Nikki de Saint-Phalle, another visionary artist, an iconic artist who was born in France in 1930, raised in the US. So she's very much has an American side to her, spent her career mostly in France before moving to San Diego, where she made her home for the last decade of her life and left behind a vibrant legacy of public sculpture around our region. And many San Diegans are familiar with that fantastical later work, perhaps less so with her early work of the 1960s, when Saint-Phalle was the sole female member of the Nouveau Réalisme, a group that was kind of the French answer to American pop and included Christo and Armand. And I'm mentioning this because MCASD is, we're currently co-organizing a major exhibition of Saint-Phalle's 1960s work with the Menil Collection in Houston. It's called Nikki de Saint-Phalle in the 1960s, and it will be a major survey of that decade in which she made her shooting paintings and her nanas, and it will open with the La Jolla building. We are working closely with the Nikki Charitable Art Foundation based here in San Diego, and they were generous enough to donate Saint-Phalle's print portfolio, Californian Diary, which is one of her most important print series, and which chronicles the artist's first year in California, and it's filled with her musings on life and her relationships and the new landscape in which she finds herself. So this is a series of 8 prints. The foundation asked that we keep the whole series together. We have one framed and hung in our downtown space, and the others are available to view. So that's how, you know, a collector might treat these, perhaps, you know, showing one at a time and switching them out over time, which is kind of the ideal for works on paper. I'll just say that printmaking was an important aspect of Saint-Phalle's work going back to the 60s. And Californian Diary is an important example of her later graphic style, you know, which is characterized by her calligraphic line drawings and her distinct penmanship, which is very kind of youthful and intentionally naive, and it became one of her trademarks. I try not to go on about this for too long, but I want to show you a few images. This one is Queen Khalifa, and it relates to Queen Khalifa's Magical Garden, which is her sculpture park in Escondido, her only major sculpture park in the US. And, you know, in her later work, she has this universe in which animals and humans and monsters coexist. So here you have Khalifa, the legendary pagan warrior queen of California. And I'll show you a few more just to give you a sense. Some of these prints are very confessional in nature, and this one is about the men in her life. You have some of her famous Nana figures, Shamu and the Statue of Liberty. And I think these works are really interesting because they tend to mingle text and image in really interesting ways, kind of as these labyrinths of text, or else as kind of almost thought bubbles that accompany the figures. So that's Nikki de Saint-Phalle. I want to turn to another revered woman artist, Uchida Hurtado, who recently passed away at the age of 99. In her striking self-portraits, such as this Untitled Birth print C, Hurtado often represented her own body from a downward facing perspective, as in this image of birth. So you can see that we're looking down at her breasts and belly and her open legs. And it's fascinating because Hurtado made these birth images early in her career in the 60s and 70s, and then she returned to them again at the very end of her life. Let me just tell you a little bit of her backstory in case you're not familiar, because she had a meteoric rise in the art world in the past several years. She's a Venezuelan-born artist who was married to two different very important modernist artists, the Austrian painter Wolfgang Paulin and Lee Mulliken, who she lived with in LA for many decades. And secretly throughout those many years, she was creating a really wildly original body of work just for herself. She didn't show anybody, nobody knew about it. And it was only after Lee Mulliken passed away that his studio assistant found this trove of her work and started showing it to people. And eventually Hans Ulrich Obrist, the Swiss curator, saw it and decided to plan her retrospective, and sort of the rest is history. She was named one of Time magazine's most influential people in 2019, and LACMA hosted her retrospective earlier this year. So she's an astonishing artist. I sort of have a female power theme that I'm developing here, so stay with me. We'll go next to Marnie Weber, an artist beloved by our museum. Last year, she was the subject of a solo show drawn from our substantial holdings of her work. She's an artist who emerged in Los Angeles's punk music and performance scene of the 1980s, and she's known for her work in collage and film, installation, sculpture, costume, music, and all of these formats. Her work is characterized by a dreamlike aesthetic, and the films often feature supernatural female protagonists, like her film The Spirit Girls, about a fictitious all-female band that dies and comes back to life to play their music. So her works sort of have this macabre fairy tale quality to them, full of animals and ghosts and what she calls spirit trees. You can see these themes echoed in this collage, and So Goes the Moon is the title. It's a classic Marnie Weber image, very much in dialogue with surrealist collage of the early 20th century, but it's unmistakably part of Weber's distinctive universe. You have a kind of hybrid owl, with the face of the face of a girl and moth's wings, perched on a snake-like branch, and the owl girl's face is an echo of the moon above, which is almost camouflaged into the atmospheric psychedelic background. That's Marnie Weber. Next, we'll go to Laura Schnitger, who is a Los Angeles-based artist, originally from the Netherlands, and has been based in LA for about 20 years. MCASD acquired a major sculpture by Schnitger as part of our Prospect exhibition in 2019. That piece, some of you might remember, was a large-scale wood and fabric figural sculpture in the form of a goddess mother who was orbited by her unruly children. Schnitger is known for her works that layer textiles and graphic imagery in works that combine fashion, modernist design, and often protest signage. So she layers graphic elements onto textiles, as you can see in this piece called A Fine Line, in which an image of a woman's arm and leg are printed onto stretched velvet. So it's a very sheer, thin velvet, almost like a scrim that has been stretched over the frame. And this is a typical strategy in Schnitger's work to stretch or hang like sheer or opaque fabric on wooden armatures, or here a traditional frame. And especially in the case of her sculpture, the fabric becomes a kind of stand-in for the body. But here you have the bodily referent as well. The woman outside the frame seems to be peeling off her sock, and Schnitger's work often explores these themes of female desire and also defiance. It's a great piece that evokes sensual pleasure and I think also politics. I want to try to tell you the dimensions, if I can remember. This is 32 by 26. Next, we'll turn to April Rose. And the other thing I would like to do is, if I can remember to tell you the lot number, and actually if anybody's trying to follow along in their auction catalog, this is page 33. April Rose is a very interesting San Diego-based artist who moved here from the Bay Area a few years ago. She makes vibrant and inventive ceramic work, installations, videos, and more. I would say that her main themes have to do with kind of female power, feminine power. She often presents these kind of imagery derived from women's bodies in combination with natural elements like suns and moons or the cloud formation that you see in this piece. She's actually deeply influenced by Nikki de Saint Paul and often works in a more kind of radiant rainbow palette. The piece that we are featuring, Breathing My Mother in, is a quieter, more intimate piece, a wall-mounted ceramic in 2 parts. You can see the 2 women's heads that come together, their silhouettes meet and almost merge, a mother and daughter. Together they appear as the single cloud formation. Again, the title, Breathing My Mother In, and you can see these floral plumes that are kind of, you know, their shared breath. The piece is about 2 feet wide and 10.5 inches tall. I think she's a great artist. We had a super studio visit with her last year, and she also makes clothing. If you're doing research about these artists, her website is Rainbow Kimono. She's kind of hard to find otherwise, but she had a wonderful 2-person show with Katie Ruiz, who we also love, at Mesa College last year. Okay, next I'm going to talk about a group of incredible painters, mostly abstract painters, starting with Linda Bessemer. She is a Los Angeles-based artist who has been making really interesting abstract paintings since the early 80s. You see here one of her glitch paintings. And Bessemer, as well as the next artist I'm going to talk about, use paint to respond to our contemporary digital condition. And she does so in ways that create a tension between the materiality of the paint and the virtual spaces that she evokes. Her paintings are derived from a process of digital manipulation. She composes on the computer and allows for glitches to happen, moments of slippage that sort of challenge our notions of technological perfection. She then hand paints the digital compositions, and in these works that they're really insistently handmade, but they have an incredible dimensionality to them, producing these spaces that are entirely unreal but seem to correspond to cyberspace. And that is lot 17, page 17. I should have remembered to say that, 15 by 18 inches. Trudy Benson, this is lot 16, page 17, is an emerging New York-based painter who has received a lot of attention in recent years for her vivid canvases that also evoke the digital world. In Benson's case, her paintings seem to use graphic design software like Microsoft, well, I guess Mac Paint or Windows Paint or even Photoshop. But this is contrasted with the surfaces of her painting. So you see this kind of more, almost looks like it could be a computer-generated image in the background. And then these areas in the foreground where the paint is heavily built up. And her technique is to layer her paint using an airbrush or an industrial roller. And then she lets the layers dry and goes back in and adds more layers. So it kind of evokes a computer-generated image, but there's also this insistence on the facts of paint. You can see drips, or it's a little hard to see in the image, but there's a purple circle that is almost like she's just squeezed paint directly out of the tube. Trudy Benson, she has galleries in New York, Geneva, Luxembourg, and locally you might have seen her work in the Strauss Family Foundation collection. The next 2 artists are wonderful painters whose work merges abstraction and figuration. They're kind of 2 of my favorites in the auction. This is Sarah Dwyer. She is, and we're looking at lot 30, page 20. She's an Irish artist based in London, earned a master's degree in painting from the Royal College of Art. A painter who draws on various modernist traditions, modernist painting traditions. Her work often evokes abstract expressionists like Willem de Kooning or Arshile Gorky. Drawing is at the center of her practice. She's a painter, but the paintings have a lot of drawing in them, and you can see how she really emphasizes line. Her canvases are worked and then reworked. She builds up multiple layers of paint in some areas, while other areas reveal raw linen beneath. It's difficult to discern exactly what we're looking at, but you can kind of see that there are two central figures who are interacting. And I'll just add that she's really interested in poetry and folklore, and she often builds up her images as a kind of intuitive response to a poem that she's working with. So it's a really great composition and a beautiful color palette, and a nice substantial scale at almost 4 feet, about 4 feet high and a little over 3 feet wide. Next, we'll go to Maugley Guerra, who is a Montreal-born, Chicago-based painter. This is lot 37, page 22. She did an MFA at the Art Institute of Chicago about 10 years ago. And I just love this untitled painting. I find it really intriguing. Her paintings are abstract, but her forms are familiar and somewhat recognizable. On the one hand, machinic and architectural, and on the other hand, biomorphic. There's a certain confusion between foreground and background, and we find ourselves maybe trying to untangle the shapes and to puzzle out whether one form is in front of or behind another. And her process is interesting. She works on multiple paintings at once, starting with a shape that she repeats across multiple compositions. So this is almost a surrealist automatic process that she uses to establish the underlying structure of her paintings. And then she allows herself to respond to each canvas individually. A couple other things to note: her muted saltwater taffy palette, and also the fact that the surfaces of her paintings are very built up with her mark making techniques, and in some areas she seems to kind of rub or scrape the surface, so there's an interesting texture going on. She has galleries in Chicago, Montreal, and London. Next, we're going to shift to a few local artists who are also working in an abstract vein, beginning with Thomas Demello, a terrific San Diego artist whose work you may have seen in the solo exhibition at Quint Gallery a couple of years ago, or at Ice Gallery in the past. He also curates the excellent exhibition program at Bread and Salt. The works that you see here are part of an ongoing series of process-based drawings, and by process-based, I mean that the forms, the drawings are dictated by the artist's process, which I'll tell you more about. These works were originally conceived while Demello was stalled in traffic and noticing the streaks of car paint on freeway dividers, the residue of collisions. And so in these drawings, he replicates this collision on a more intimate scale, striking his paper with a handful of colored pencils using fast, forceful motions. These gestures produce a range of effects. Sometimes they stutter, sometimes they kind of feather across the page. And just to give you a little more context for his work, he's part of a generation of San Diego artists who have been deeply influenced by Robert Irwin, and particularly Irwin's site-responsive approach to art making. And many of Demello's larger scale works are also site-specific in nature. Next is Becky Guten. This is lot 39, page 23. Guten is an established San Diego-based artist, originally from Mexico City, whose retrospective is being planned by the Secut in Tijuana. She's an artist who works across media and is particularly known for her sculptures that emphasize their materiality. She works with recycled materials very often, processed metals, and also with organic materials. So there's often a kind of tension in the work between the natural and the industrial. The work that you see here, Residue of Motion, is part of a series of ball-bound sculptures that she created through experimentation with fiberglass, epoxy, resin, fabrics, cheesecloth, and paint. So this is another work whose form is dictated by that experimental process that the artist is engaged in. And the work appears to be metallic, but in fact it's not, and it's incredibly lightweight. And then it contains this vivid red interior. It sort of reminds me of a Linda Benglis. Next we have Sasha Kuzell Ribstein, lot 48, page 25. She is an inventive ceramicist whose works you may have seen at a number of venues around town, from Quint Gallery to Bread and Salt, and she leads the ceramics department at Palomar College. She has garnered attention for these sublime and offbeat creations, as in the work seen here. All I Ever Wanted Was Everything, made of porcelain and 22 karat gold. This piece is typical of Ribstein's signature works, which create, simultaneously the appearance of movement and of stasis. Her dripping forms appear to be liquid, and they're often contrasted with forms that are rock-like and hard. And it's almost as if the forms are metamorphosizing into one another. This is in some ways a comment on clay as a medium, pointing to its malleability and its potential for hardness and solidity. But her creations also appear to be in the process of a more kind of alchemical transformation and a continuous state of being. She often includes glitter or crystals or gold. And she's spoken about how our attraction to glitter or to the glimmer of these forms can be traced to an instinctual human need to seek out the sparkle of fresh water for survival. So for her, the shimmer is a point of universal connection. Next is Klein Swanger. This is lot 90, page 27. She's a very interesting and accomplished emerging San Diego-based artist who recently finished an MFA at San Diego State, but she had quite an established practice before that and has a connection to our museum through her participation in the show, the To Do Mending project that we hosted last summer. She led one of the workshops. Her work often explores spatial and psychological relationships. She creates beautifully crafted and lyrical installations that often play with light and shadow, using materials drawn from both urban and natural landscapes. You can see this combination here in her wall-mounted sculpture Green and Yellow, which presents a dynamic composition of both found and manipulated materials, an etched copper square with a green patina that sits in front of a yellow rectangular form, and then another copper sheet that is perforated, allowing light to pass through. And this is typical of her work, in which objects often produce shadows, drawing attention to the architecture of the space and relationships between the various components of her compositions. I want to switch gear. I think maybe I need to speed up just a little bit and talk about a few photographic works in the auction, including one of our live lots by Trevor Paglin, the MacArthur Genius Award-winning artist whose mid-career survey we hosted last year, which was organized by the Smithsonian American Art Museum. Paglin's sublime and sometimes futuristic work explores the seen and the unseen, the visible and the invisible, particularly as these categories relate to surveillance and secrecy. His photographs often reference historical landscape photography or painting, but he brings his knowledge of other disciplines such as computer science, also the military, geography, to bear on these images. So they're very rich, layered images. This one, Cloud number 246, it resembles the skyscape of a romantic painting. It's part of the artist's recent work on machine vision and artificial intelligence, the kind of artificial intelligence that is now used in autonomous surveillance systems, guided missile technology, and 3D modeling. So what you see here is this, glowing cloud formation that's overlaid with a lattice of strokes and lines that shows what a computer vision algorithm sees in it and how that program would try to make sense of it. But of course, it's a cloud. It's a more or less formless shape. So there's something kind of perverse or subversive in asking the machine to try to read something so elusive and sort of suggest the failures of that system and maybe what the human eye can see the machine still can't make sense of. But there's also a comment on these technologies that are becoming more pervasive because these are also algorithms that are similar to those used in self-driving cars, which are becoming more common, robotics and facial recognition software. So that's Trevor Paglin. It's a beautiful, large piece. Next, we have Farah and Karapedian. She is an important voice in contemporary photography and was based in LA for a long time. We in San Diego are fortunate that she moved here to lead the photography area in the art department at the University of San Diego. And you could say that she works with photography in a very expanded way, often emphasizing photographic processes, as in the work seen here, as well as physical and bodily gestures that go into producing the works. Her series Push, you're looking here at Push 10, is one that she arrived at through a mistake that she made while she was creating a different body of work, in which a piece of ice slipped across the surface of colored paper in the dark room and slithered its way across the surface. And she decided to embrace that mistake and to produce a series. This is a photogram, which is an image that's made by placing objects onto light-sensitive paper and then exposing it to light. And so, again, she embraced this kind of chance procedure in the series and began to actively push the ice across the surface of the paper in order to make these sumptuous images, which you know, are images of the action by which they were created. And her work, I'll mention, is in the collection of the Getty Museum, LACMA, and SF MoMA. Next, we'll go to Louisa Lombri. This is lot 49, page 26. She's an Italian photographer whose work I love. She's based in Milan and lived in LA for a while. And I know her work is here in our community in the collection of Joyce and Ted Strauss. Lombri photographs modernist buildings, often the interiors of modernist houses, but instead of documenting the architecture, she conveys the experience of the space, often focusing on doors or windows or corners, and these kind of in-between transitional spaces. And here she photographs the Barcelona Pavilion, designed by Mies van der Rohe and Lily Reich in 1929 for the International Exposition in Barcelona. It's an important building in the history of modernist architecture. Actually, a lot of contemporary artists have made work about this building. But you know, she often photographs architectural masterpieces of this kind, but then she renders them virtually anonymous. And because she's really trying to emphasize the experience, the phenomenological experience of the place. So here she offers us a close-up of aluminum paned windows and an onyx wall behind, which are intrinsic to the design of the pavilion, but they're not immediately recognizable here. And our perception of the space is also affected by Lombri's positioning, kind of looking into the pavilion from the outside. So I'll just end by noting that she had a beautiful show at the Met Dwyer a few years ago, and her mid-career survey is being organized in Milan, and I hope it will travel to the US. Next is Anne Hamilton. Many of you will be familiar with her work, an artist that our museum has a long institutional relationship with, known for her poetic meditations on language, the body, and labor in works that take the form of large-scale multimedia installations and other times are more intimate. And the work you see here is from Hamilton's Visite series of prints, which he made with Gemini gel. It's a beautiful layered lithograph, and the blue area is actually fabric that was applied to the Japanese paper that she's printing on. This series of prints was inspired by 19th century photographs known as carte de visite. These are small albumin photographs about the size of a calling card that were common then. And the portraits in the series, such as the one you see here, the fragment of a woman's face, is taken from carte de visite photographs that the artist found in the archives of historic New England. She rephotographed the faces with a miniature handheld surveillance camera affixed to her finger, which is related, you know, this is something she's done over the years. It's related to the work she made with a pinhole camera inside her mouth, which you may have seen. This is a sizable piece, 55 inches tall, 29.5 inches wide. I'm going to jump to a very different contemporary form of portraiture and also to a couple works that focus on drawing. This is Shizu Saldamando. She is a Los Angeles-based artist who works primarily in drawing, but she's an exquisite draftsperson and has become well known for her intimate portraits depicting figures from her community who are sometimes recognizable figures from the art world, and other times figures that are more from the subcultures that she's part of, such as the Latinx punk and queer club scenes. One of her strategies, which you see here, is to isolate a figure from in a photograph, like a more populated source photograph, so that she's spotlighting the person and really bringing them to life, drawing attention to them. This is Sandy Switchblade in her leather jacket. She has a button on her lapel that says The Kinks, so you know what music she likes. And I found a quote from Saldamondo commenting on this work in which she said, "This piece is of my friend Sandra and her amazing hair. She lives by the mantra, the bigger the hair, the closer to God." And I was thinking she does have such great hair. This is a colored pencil drawing on paper measuring 32 by 22 inches. And I should have said it's lot 79, page 34. Another terrific drawing by Barbara Sexton. This is lot 84, page 35. Sexton is a longtime San Diego artist who I think deserves to be more widely known. She was featured in our 2018 regional survey exhibition, Being Here With You. She has a background in math and science, which she studied before turning to painting in graduate school. And her work has this rigorous, almost scientific sense of experimentation about it. In the 1970s, she was kind of dissecting her paintings. She would remove the canvas and hang it from stretcher bars. And at that point, she did her master's at San Diego State, but she was also taking classes at Southwestern College when Baldessari taught there. So Baldessari was a big influence for her. And later her practice came to emphasize drawing, photography, and digital media in works that really explore language and power. Those are her key themes. So she's a conceptual artist, but she really emphasizes craft, and she's an incredible draftsperson. You see here this her graphite drawing of a feather. It's a very dense graphite drawing made on top of a topographical map of the oceans that was produced at the Scripps Institute, so it has a nice local connection. And for the artist, the feather carries associations of freedom, awareness, and communication. She's very philosophical in her approach. And the idea of the series has to do with linguistics, and it's actually has a lot of philosophy behind it that I'm sure she would love to tell anybody about who acquires the work. Next, we're going to go to Michelle Montjoy, another artist we love at MCASD. She was also featured in Being Here With You, for which she created a multi-tiered installation of knitted forms that hung from the ceiling of Farrell Gallery. And then in 2019, in the summer, Montjoy was one of 3 artists who created To Do, a Mending Project, a series of participatory workshops that MCASD hosted that focused on actions of repair. And we are really grateful to those artists for those amazing workshops in that program last year. And each of them generously agreed to donate works to the auction. So I'm going to end with Michelle Montjoy, Anna O'Kane, and Siobhan Arnold. Montjoy has actually donated 2 works that we thought paired together nicely. So I'll show you both of them. First, if I can go back to the hanging sculpture, this is Untitled Borrego, which is related to the one that we featured in Being Here With You, but domestically scaled. She makes works out of knotted together strips of old t-shirts and other recycled fabrics, often working collaboratively with others on these hand-built tabletop looms. Sometimes she works alone, sometimes she brings others, and it's kind of a social practice work. She modifies the resulting pieces to produce these kind of eccentric biomorphic forms that she groups and suspends in installations. They're really wonderful. And then the other piece, this is one of her embroidered handkerchief pieces, and it can be read as either "It's not me, it's you," or "It's not you, it's me." And this is kind of a meditative practice for her, where she finds found textiles such as handkerchiefs and embroiders humorous phrases onto them. So there's this real attention to the materials of everyday life that surround us in Montjoy's work. She's a former public school teacher who has really come into her own as an artist in the past decade, and she has a great talent for community organizing as well. She's fantastic. Next, we're going to go to Anna O'Kane. Anna O'Kane is one of the 3 artists I was just mentioning. She teaches at Mira Costa College, went to the Art Institute of Chicago, and earned her MFA at UCSD. Her work draws inspiration from, again, from everyday life, from the activities, materials, speech of everyday life. And you can see this in her Nighttime series here, in which she presents a trio of images showing a blood moon, a stack of bills, and a fig tree. There's a kind of elegance and hushed poetry to the piece. O'Kane is interested in record keeping as a theme, in fragments of memory, and she plays with rules of order and organization. And then I will end with Siobhan Arnold and her Reaching Branches. She is, again, one of the group of 3 artists who conceived of to do a mending project, a mixed media artist who works with photography, textiles, sculpture, and installation. She received her BA from the University of Chicago and an MFA from UC Santa Barbara, and has lived in San Diego for a long time. She teaches at California State University San Marcos. And her work often explores history, folklore, and myth. There's a real poetry to this work as well. And I'll just mention this is actually a work that she produced in collaboration with another artist. They're called the Sane Collective. And so this is a project that she does with Megan Shane, who lives in Michigan. And they produce these cyanotypes. A cyanotype is a unique photograph, a photogram that was made in this case from a paper negative that was drawn by hand. So it's a really lovely piece that conjures imagery from the natural world. So I'm gonna see if I can maybe stop sharing my screen and see if we have any questions. I don't see any questions in the Q&A box. Anything anyone would like me to elaborate, or any questions you might have about these works? Just give it another second. Oh, it looks like maybe we have one popping up. So this question is, if I win a work in the auction, does the work come with some sort of write-up, like with a text? You know, we have the catalog, which has very brief descriptions, but if you would like any of the information I've provided today, I can certainly supply that. That would be easy enough, but I don't think we have like a set text. In some cases, artists have supplied, I know they've supplied their CVs and sometimes artist statements, so we can give you any additional information you might want. Some of the pieces that so this is a new question, some of the pieces you reviewed today do not appear on Artsy. You know, they should all be there. When I was putting this presentation together yesterday, they were all there, but the confusion could be that there's actually 2 places to look. There's the live auction page, and then there is the silent auction page, and most of the works I discussed today, with the exception of 3, are in the silent auction portion. So they should all be there, and you can expand the images, go in close and look at them. Okay, any other questions? Again, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to supply any additional information that we can, and just want to thank you all for joining today. I wish I could see your faces, and we will look forward to hearing from Catherine on Thursday at 11, and then on to the auction. So thanks so much.